The story begins with a 20-year-old boy named Will Hunting. He lives in a very poor neighborhood but works at the world's most famous university, MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. While it sounds impressive, the reality is that Will doesn't study there. He simply cleans the university's buildings as a janitor. One day, while cleaning a hallway, his eyes fall upon a very difficult math problem written on a blackboard. The problem was written by Professor Gerald Lamo, who had challenged the entire college that whoever solved it would have their name published in the university's records, earning both fame and respect. Will looks at the problem closely and becomes fixated on it. He thinks about it all day, even while he's at a bar with his friends, his mind still tangled in the equation. Suddenly, he leaves his friends and goes straight to his small, old house to work on solving the problem through the night. Since he doesn't have a blackboard at home, he writes the solution on his bathroom mirror, erasing his mistakes and trying again and again. After several hours, he finally solves the problem. A few days later, when he goes to work, he writes the correct solution on the blackboard while cleaning. When Professor Lamo sees the solution, he is astonished. He can't believe that one of his students solved such a difficult problem so quickly. He becomes desperate to find out who this genius is. That same evening, Will is out with his friends when they encounter another group of people. One of them makes fun of a girl. Will recognizes this person. It was the same boy who used to bully him as a child. In a fit of anger, Will tells his friend to stop the car, gets out without thinking, and attacks him. Will punches him, and before long, a brawl breaks out between the two groups. The police arrive shortly after. Will's friends try to pull him away, but it's too late. The police arrest Will. The next morning, Professor Lamo is giving a lecture to his students. Everyone's eyes are on him, wanting to know who solved the difficult problem, but no one in the class gives an answer. A little disappointed, the professor says, "If someone has solved the last problem, I will now give you an even more difficult one." He explains that it's the same problem he and his colleagues have been working on for the last 2 years, and he writes it on the board. Meanwhile, Will is released from the police station and tells his friends he has a court date next week. In the evening, he goes to his job and once again sees a seemingly easy problem written on the board. He quickly starts solving it, hoping no one will see him. Just then, Professor Lamo comes out of his office and sees Will writing on the board. He angrily asks, "What are you doing here?" Will immediately apologizes and backs away. The professor thinks he's just a troublemaker scribbling on the board and tries to catch him, but Will quickly disappears. When the professor looks at the board again, he realizes the correct answer is written there. He is stunned. After finishing work, Will goes to a bar with his friends and tells them he's been fired. Now he won't be able to come to the university to solve problems. When his friends ask why he was fired, Will jokingly says, "Just some management changes." The next day, Professor Lamo is determined to find this mysterious genius. He goes directly to the janitorial office to ask for the name of the boy who works there. However, the staff thinks the professor is there to complain about the cleaning and hesitates to give Will's name. After some time, it is revealed that Will wasn't working at MIT by choice. It was community service assigned by the court. The day of his hearing arrives. Professor Lamo is also present in the courtroom. Everyone watches as Will argues his own case. He demonstrates such knowledge of law and society that everyone is amazed. However, he has a long list of prior offenses, so the judge sends him to jail and sets bail at $50,000. Sometime later, Professor Lamo visits Will in jail. He tells him that the judge has agreed to release him, but on 2 conditions. First, Will must study with the professor every week. Second, he must meet with a psychological therapist every week to help with his anger and criminal tendencies. Will doesn't think he needs a therapist, but he agrees to the conditions to be free. After getting out of jail, he begins studying with the professor and easily solves the most difficult problems. The professor is highly impressed by his ability, but the therapy isn't as easy. The professor calls several different doctors, but no one can handle Will. The first doctor gets scared because Will mocks his book, claiming he read it in one night and found nothing special in it. Hearing this, the doctor leaves the session in anger. A second psychologist tries a different approach, attempting to hypnotize Will, but this method also fails. Seeing this, Professor Lamo almost gives up. Then, he remembers his old college friend, Sean Maguire, who is now a psychologist. The professor goes to Sean's office, explains Will's case, and invites him to discuss it at a restaurant. Sean initially refuses because his schedule is very busy. But Professor Lamo explains that Will is no ordinary boy but a genius on a different level, comparing him to a famous mathematician who made great discoveries without any formal education. Hearing this, Sean finally agrees to meet Will. In the first session, Will, as usual, tries to annoy the doctor with rudeness and jokes. He even makes fun of a painting Sean made, calling it terrible. Sean doesn't get angry and remains calm. But when Will starts mocking his personal life and his wife, Sean becomes furious. In a stern voice, he says, "If you ever mention my wife's name again, I will end you." And with that, he ends the session. Later, when Professor Lamo sees that Sean is upset, he tells him he can drop the case if he wants. But Sean firmly states that he will see Will again next week. After the first session, Sean keeps thinking about what Will said, especially the mention of his wife, which makes him feel lonely. Meanwhile, Will moves on with his life a bit. He goes on a date with a girl named Skylar, whom he met at the bar. Skylar tells him she inherited a lot of money from her father and is thinking of getting into Stanford University. They have a wonderful evening and end up kissing at a diner. Now comes the second therapy session. This time, Sean takes Will to a park bench instead of his office. As soon as Will starts with his old taunts and jokes, Sean stops him. Sean says he has thought a lot about what Will said and now has something to say himself. He explains that while Will may be very well-read and intelligent, he knows nothing about real life. He might know about every artist from books, but he has never left Boston to see their actual artwork. He can recite books on war, but he has never seen a battlefield. He can quote love poems, but he has never truly loved a woman or completely opened himself up to one. And most importantly, until Will shares his own pain, no one can understand the sorrow of being an orphan. Sean tells him that these are things you can't learn from books. Life itself teaches the real lessons. In the next session, Will remains silent the entire time. Sean sits quietly because he knows Will is just testing him, and he turns out to be right. In the very next session, Will breaks his silence and tells Sean a dirty joke. After that, they start making small talk. Will tells him about his date. When Sean asks if he will see Skylar again, Will admits a truth. He probably won't because he doesn't want his perfect image of her to be shattered. But Sean explains that Will is actually afraid of his own perfect image, not the girl's. Real relationships require accepting each other's flaws and habits. Sean tells a story about his wife, who recently passed away from cancer, saying he misses her little habits and quirks the most. Real love and intimacy happen when we accept a person with all their imperfections. For the first time, Will listens intently. On another front, Will goes to Skylar's dorm to see her. Skylar is surprised because Will hadn't called her in a long time, but she agrees to go out. The next day, they go to a dog race and have a great time. Skylar asks Will where he grew up. Will hides the truth and jokingly says he has 12 older brothers. Skylar laughs and says it's a lie, but Will swears on it, making the story even more amusing. He even has to promise to introduce her to his family soon. After this, Skylar asks Will how someone knows if they've found their true partner. This question sticks in Will's mind, and the next day, he asks Sean the same thing. Sean smiles and says he knew the moment he saw his wife. He then tells a story about once having rare tickets to a huge baseball game, but skipping it to meet a beautiful girl at a bar. Sean says he still has no regrets about missing that game. Skylar keeps insisting that Will introduce her to his real family, but Will still avoids telling the truth. So, he decides to at least introduce her to his friends. Skylar easily fits in with his group, joking around and drinking beer with everyone. But at the end of the night, a comment from his friend Chucky sours Will's mood. Meanwhile, Professor Lamo meets Sean at a diner and questions him about Will's therapy. Lamo doesn't really care about Will's past. He wants to know what Will is going to do next under his guidance. Sean replies that he won't pressure Will because Will has to decide for himself what he wants in life. This angers Lamo, who says he has already set up meetings for Will with important people. What he doesn't know is that Will's friend Chucky went to those meetings in his place, demanding money and ruining the deals with his bad behavior. Elsewhere, Will and Skylar spend a romantic evening together, and their relationship deepens. At her place, Skylar asks Will a direct question. She tells him she is going to California to study at Stanford and wants him to come with her. But Will immediately refuses, making all sorts of excuses. Skylar tries to explain that he is just stuck in his small world, where he faces no challenges and is afraid of new things. Hearing this, Will gets angry. He thinks Skylar is just playing with him and that he is just a fling for her because he is poor. Skylar, surprised, asks why he is so tense about money. Crying, she says that if she had to choose between her rich father's wealth and her father, she would always choose her father, not the money. Skylar makes it clear that she's scared too, but at least she is being honest with Will. Will argues again, and then Skylar remembers that Will had repeatedly told her the fake story of his 12 brothers. Now, Will completely loses his temper and starts shouting. He says Skylar would never want to know about his real life because the truth is that he is an orphan who was treated very badly as a child. With tear-filled eyes, Skylar assures him that she wants to know everything about him, no matter how painful. Finally, Skylar tells him what's in her heart. She loves him. But Will's heart is already closed off, and in a cold voice, he says, "I don't love you." After this, Will meets with Professor Lamo. Lamo is angry because Will's behavior at the business meetings ruined everything. Will explodes in anger, saying he's not even sure he wants an academic career anymore. The conversation between Will and the professor becomes even more difficult as Will's sharp intellect makes Lamo feel inferior. Lamo says he expected at least a little gratitude from Will. They argue, and Will storms off. Sometime later, Will is called for a job at the National Security Agency, NSA, where he is promised a golden career. But Will flatly refuses, saying he doesn't want to ruin an ordinary person's life for political games. After this, Will meets Sean again. Sean asks why he turned down the NSA job. Will laughs and says, "I'm just waiting for a better opportunity." Sean, his therapist, asks Will if he has any friends he can talk to about his feelings or if he ever feels lonely. Instead of answering, Will starts listing the names of famous philosophers. Sean explains that real relationships can only be made with living people. Sean then asks what Will really wants if he's serious about his future. Will jokingly says he wouldn't mind being a bricklayer or a shepherd. Sean understands that Will is just joking and running from his true self. In anger, Sean throws him out of his office. Will is shocked and asks why he's being kicked out. Sean says plainly, "Because you're not answering honestly. You're just hiding your true self." As they talk, Will asks, "You talk about your life partner, but where is your wife?" Sean calmly replies, "She's no longer in this world." Time passes, and Will calls Skylar, but she has given up waiting for him because he won't make a firm decision. For the last time, Skylar says, "I love you. Take care," and then she leaves for California. Meanwhile, Will starts working a construction job in Boston with his friend Chucky. Professor Lamo is on the phone saying that Will is no longer fulfilling his responsibilities. If he reports to the court that Will isn't attending his sessions, Will go back to jail, and this time, his conscience will be clear. During a break at work, Chucky asks Will what he plans to do with his life. Will jokes that he doesn't want to be a lab rat solving math problems but wants to stay in Boston and have fun with his friends. But this time, Chucky scolds Will openly. He says Will is wasting his talent. Chucky even admits that every day, he wishes that one day Will would just leave his house and build his real life. Meanwhile, Lamo finds out that Will is no longer attending therapy with Sean. Angrily, Lamo threatens Sean, saying he will tell the judge everything and accuses Sean of pushing Will back towards a life of crime. Sean tells Professor Lamo that he doesn't care if people laugh at him, but he cannot ignore Will's feelings. Sean points out that Lamo has never been able to accept real love and has lived his whole life alone. But Lamo refuses to listen, thinking Sean is just jealous of his success. Sean is shocked by this and thinks Lamo is just arrogant. Sean explains that he only cares about Will's future and his true desires, whereas Lambo's pressure could make him fail. Lamo then quietly leaves, leaving Will alone with Sean. Sean tells Will that his and Lambo's fight isn't personal but is tied to their past. Then, changing the subject, Sean mentions that he has prepared a report for the judge about Will. Will asks him if he has had other patients like him. For the first time, Sean shares his personal life, revealing that his father was an alcoholic who used to beat him. He tells Will, "It's not your fault," regarding everything that happened to him. At first, Will tries to brush it off with a joke, but then he suddenly breaks down and lets out his true emotions. It finally becomes clear that his foster father was an alcoholic who used to beat him severely as a child. Will comes to Sean for his final session and tells him that he has decided to take a job at one of the companies suggested by Professor Lamo and that he is happy with this decision. Sean also says that he has decided to travel the world a bit and gives Will his number as he leaves. In the evening, Will celebrates his birthday with his friends. They gift him a car that they built from old parts. Meanwhile, Professor Lamo goes to see Sean. They both apologize to each other and then go out for a drink at a bar. On the other side, Chucky comes to pick up Will as usual, but this time, he sees that Will is not home. Seeing this, Chucky is very happy, just as he had always wished in his dreams. Will had left a note for Sean. Sean reads it and finds out that Will has quit his job and gone to California to be with Skylar. In the note, Will writes the same line that Sean once said to his friends when he decided to skip the baseball game to meet his future wife. And with this beautiful sentiment, the story ends. This story teaches us that true victory in life comes not from degrees or jobs, but from finding true love and recognizing one's own purpose.